podcast. I'm your boy and your co-host, Kev, and we have a phenomenal young lady on today. And so, I do want to preface this right because we we talk about mental health, substance use, suicide prevention, anything in between. And I just want to emphasize that if at all, for some reason, during today's episode, you are triggered, there are resources available. You can dial 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline if you are in the United States or any of the related territories, uh, South America, Central America, Canada. You can also dial 911 if you need immediate emergency medical services. You can also reach out to on Psychology Today. That's another resource for you to be able to seek help through. There's many resources out there. We're going to be talking about teen mental health, which is a very significant concern in today's society. And what's better than than to have a expert who works with the teen population? And I'm grateful for that. I don't work with teens. I don't specialize with teens. But let's welcome Miss Tara to the show today, and let her start off by kind of seeing what she wants us to know about her, uh,
Ah,
and get y'all to maybe learn a little bit about her before we jump in.
awesome. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I've been a teacher of strictly junior high for this is year 18, I believe. So I work with mostly kids in grade 9. So they're about 14 to 15 years old. And because I've been teaching for such a long time, I've kind of witnessed how their mental health has shifted, especially with the inclusion of social media and technology. When I started teaching, kids didn't have their own cell phones. The occasional kid might show up with like a flip phone. You remember those old flip phones? You couldn't actually access the internet. Your pictures were terrible, and when you texted, you had to like hit every number to get to the letter. So that's where I started teaching, and now, fast forward to today, every single kid has access to everything at all times in their back pocket. And that has had such a significant effect on their mental health. And that led me to write two novels. They're primarily YA, but have actually become popular with adults too. I think any adult that has a teenager in their life. And both of my books center around how technology has affected kids' lives and especially their mental health.
Wow. No, and I do appreciate you do sharing that information. And I have to ask, okay, because I always ask every author this, whether it's at the beginning, end, the middle, somewhere in, doesn't matter. If somebody wants to buy your books, where can they find them at?
Yeah, so both of my books, Chasing Through Time and At Least I'm Trying, which just came out like less than a month ago, I think, are on Amazon. In the States are on Barnes and Noble, and in Canada that would be Indigo and Chapters. So all online for anybody in the United States on Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
Sweet. Now, I'm going to ask this one too as a follow up.
Okay.
I mean, are they like $20, $10, or I mean, listen, if you're going to use the One Moment Podcast
Yeah.
as a resource referral code, our code is 1 moment, so we're going to get an $80 chip in. But I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, seriously, thank you though. All jokes aside, thank you for sharing that information because I think it's important. That's an additional resource for people
Mhm.
to read. Um, Fortunately and unfortunately, depending upon one's perception, I specialize with adults, 18
Yeah.
and older. Doesn't matter. I
Mhm.
work with all folks, all types of folks, all ages. 80-year-olds, I'm willing to work with and help them if they want to make a complaint on me. Then that's fine. I'll walk them to the phone and I'll pick up the phone and dial the number for them. And I'm
Mhm.
also willing to help them explore their the meaning of their life. Teenagers, however, that is a different story. So, what do you feel like? I know we were talking a little bit before. What do you feel like um, the some of the I don't know the top five barriers in teenagers' life? I know we were talking about uh, just the teenage life itself. as one of them. But what else would you say would be, in your experience, is the top five barriers that worsens or is related to their mental health?
Okay, well, that's a big question. So, like we were saying before, just being a teenager is hard, right? You're like being a human is hard, 100%, regardless of the age, like you said. But there's something about those teenage years where you're just feeling extra vulnerable. You're so concerned about what other people think. I think that's a huge challenge, is that just that's part of being a teenager for most. I know there's anomalies of people who don't care what people think, but for most teenagers, they are very concerned about their perception, like how they're perceived by other people. So I think that's a huge challenge, because if you have this perception that people are looking at you poorly, that affects teenagers so much more than as an adult. I think back to myself, like now, if somebody doesn't like me, I'm like, well, oh well, bye. I don't need to worry about it. But as a kid, like it just hurts so much more. So that's really hard. And now with the addition of social media, I think there's that extra layer of being perceived not only in the physical world, but how are you now perceived online? So people have these profiles where they want to, showcase certain events and look a certain way and get this many likes and have people repost. And it's kind of a vicious cycle. So now you're not only concerned about how am I perceived at school, but now how am I also perceived on the internet? Because their worlds do revolve around their phones, like primarily. I always say the phones are like their main characters in their lives. They're just like there, they're in it all the time. So that is a huge barrier. Not being able to disconnect, I think, is also a big barrier. Like we said, if I was bullied as a teenager or had a terrible day or somebody was just treating me terribly, I would go home, and I was at home and I had a safe space. I had a reprieve from that. And teenagers don't have that. It's following them home. And now, if they're being bullied or treated terribly, it continues when they get home. They're constantly on their phones hearing this negative information. Some of them all night long, they're hearing terrible things. So that's affecting their mental health. Absolutely. Oh, how many am I at? I'm losing count.
Hey, I'm
Yeah,
sitting here
those
listening.
those are big ones. Yeah, the bullying piece, not able to disconnect, the perception from other people. I think those are the big ones I try and focus on.
And now, I do appreciate you sharing that. And I wanted to get that out the way first. But I have a question because
Mhm.
I hear in the not so distant political world, and I say not so distant political world because I think it's important to emphasize that, for one, but for number two, it's one of those things that has come up in politics kind of every so often. Somebody might say something about. So I wanted to ask, and it's not a political question. We don't, we rarely talk politics on the show. There's talks about if we ban phones, that'll get
Mhm.
better, right? Mental health will, the concerns of mental health will decrease in schools with the youth, things like that. Now, I want to hear from your perspective. If we were to ban phones in school with all teenagers, like completely, when you leave the house in the morning, you can't have it on you, not even on the bus, right? Like again, I'm going with an extreme form here, so bear with me. You can't touch your phone at all until you come back home and you walk through that front door or back door, whatever door. Do you feel like that would be what are your thoughts? Do you feel like that'll be a great idea? Do you feel like that'll be a terrible idea? Like give me your experience.
Well, actually, our school just went bell to bell, no phones this year. So it it has been mind blowing how well the kids have been doing with it. And I know we can't control obviously what's happening when they go home. So I mean, I'm sure they as soon as they get home, they're like right in there again. But the amount of issues we're dealing with at school is has gone down. Kids are socializing again. They're going outside. They're playing games. It's so nice to see. Like walking through the halls last year at recess time, you imagine a hallway of a school at recess time, you picture kids playing, messing around, probably getting into some trouble, being loud, rambunctious. That was not the case. It was sometimes like crickets because they were sitting, nobody was talking. Lots of them had their phones propped up and were watching TikToks while they ate. Nobody was going outside and playing, nothing. So from my perspective, it has made a huge difference because now kids are actually being kids again. They have to socialize. That's it's a huge part of being a teenager. Going outside, that's beneficial to mental health. Being active, beneficial to mental health. Learning to deal with conflict and talking it through, that helps mental health. So it is a game changer in my opinion. And like I said, you can't control still. They're going to go home and they're going to go on their TikTok or their Fortnite or whatever it is that they do. But at least they have that time in the day to just be kids and to work on all those skills that are important as a human being.
Well, and you said earlier that one of the biggest struggles was disconnect. Now think
Mhm.
about what disconnect does, right? Like, this is a challenge to anybody who's watching this or listening to it. Think about when we are disconnected, how do we feel internally, right? Think about how we feel
Mhm.
mentally, loneliness, depression, social withdrawal. I mean, potentially anxiety, and the list goes on. And so there's this, uh, the way I like to explain it, there's this void there. And so I appreciate you sharing that your experience with, and your thoughts with that. And Indy, as it relates to this disconnection, do you feel like this is something that y'all are going to continue to press on forward about, or is it something that y'all are trying out temporarily and kind of seeing how it goes? Like, what are you seeing on, I guess, on the grounds?
Yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned disconnection, right? Because the whole purpose of phones, and I think why kids were pushed online during COVID was to connect and to stay connected. But it actually created such disconnection from like real human interaction. So by disconnecting from their phones, they have connected with each other again, which has been like that's so beneficial for mental health. But our school, just based on the benefits we've seen, we are definitely going forward. Our whole school division is moving in that direction now. So most schools have already moved there on their own, but they're making a blanket policy for next year.
Wow, that is awesome.
Mhm.
No, I mean, and one of the biggest things that people don't realize, and I don't think a lot of people do realize, is one is loneliness and the social withdrawal, this isolation, uh, you know, social depression, right? It is considered a global pandemic in and of
Mhm.
itself. And I don't mean like a pandemic that, I'm gonna get you sick and you're gonna get COVID for a week or two.
Yeah.
I don't mean that level of a pandemic. I mean mental health pandemic. It is a healthcare concern. Number two, if we don't socialize, and we are social creatures, if we don't socialize, look at how that influences our emotion regulation, our social relationships, our internal relationship with ourselves, right? Think about the self concept that it gives or doesn't give. There's so many things that come from social from being connected socially. And I love that you mentioned that you've seen problems go down. What kind of problems have you
Mhm.
seen go down as a result of this phone ban at y'all school?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. I think be like the problems that were happening online. So like kids would text each other or send snaps or like messages on Instagram or TikTok or whatever during the school day, saying terrible things to each other. Because again, we talked about earlier how not just the teenagers, with adults too, everybody's more brave behind a screen. So they're willing to say things that they wouldn't say to somebody's face. So we would have to deal with the repercussions of that as it trickled into the classroom. Kids are fighting, kids are crying, kids are needing to go see the counselor. It's those types of issues have gone down. And then I think just kids are actually expending their energy, which is a huge part because they were just sitting on a phone like a zombie. And then they get to class, they're unable to sit still because they haven't expended any energy, which we need to move our bodies. So that's a huge part of it too. And yeah, they're just happier, I guess. Like that anxiety piece, like you said. I did a little survey at the beginning of the year to ask kids how they felt about not having their phones all day. And I couldn't believe how many kids said, I'm scared because I don't know how to talk to people. Like that was their concern. And I don't know, as a teenager, it's all I wanted to do was talk to people. Because you said social creatures, we're all social creatures. But as a teenager, they're especially social. They rely on those peer relationships to learn and to grow. So the fact that kids were scared because they didn't know what to talk about was baffling to me. So now they're learning these things. They're actually spending time with each other, laughing, joking, playing. Because, yeah, sure, they're teenagers, but they're still kids. Yeah, they're much happier.
Wow. That is a beautiful transformation. And you're right. I mean, think about, what it does because, communication's a social emotional regulation skill that I can build a skill of all day on the internet. I can get on here and talk all day long, but yet what happens when I'm in front of people face to
Mhm.
face, right? And
Yeah, it's different.
oh yeah, 100%. It is
Yeah.
different. It is. It is. It's a whole skill set in and of itself. I mean, and you and I've experienced that, right? Like where we would have to get up in front of the class, growing up and have to do this presentation and oh yeah, let me do it behind the screen. Man,
Easy,
simple,
yeah.
easy. Let me get up and stand up in front of a group of folks. And it's like, yeah, no, I'm
Yeah,
fixing
it's
to have a
scary.
panic attack. Yeah, a full blown panic attack. Give me a script of benzos, right? No, but no, you're absolutely right. I'm glad you shared that. And so, does what I if I heard you correctly, the students were saying that. I mean, are they happy about it? Are they happy with the trends with this transition with no phones overall?
Yeah, I think we have a mixed. I think some of them, they they're fine, but they want their phones back. A lot of them want to talk to their mom. I'm like, you can survive not talking to your mom for the day. You're fine. But like a few of them would take them back in a heartbeat for sure. But they're not complaining about it. Nobody's. It's not a fight at all. I thought we would be fighting it every day, and confiscating phones, but we haven't at all. So they did it. They adjusted, they adapted, and now they're doing all the things they should have been doing for the last few years.
I love it. All right,
Mhm.
folks, you heard it best. Hey, listen,
Yeah,
I vote for all banning all phones in every school. Doesn't
yeah,
matter.
yeah.
100%. Let's do it. Let's
And
get
then
to
at
college,
home,
folks.
yeah, at home it's a parenting decision, right? If they get their time, and we'll still probably see the trickle effects from the home stuff. That still happens, but not as much.
Now, I do have to ask though, because you're talking about teenagers and you're talking about depression, anxiety, substance use, trigger word here, suicidality. Like you're talking about a bunch of, just mental health related problems.
Mhm.
What do you feel like in your 18 years? I'd like to ask potentially, I hope I can word it in a way that will be contrasting, compare. When you first started to now, what do you feel like the differences have been? And I don't mean like in related to cell phone use, Instagram use, Facebook, but like mental health related problems, right? Like anxiety, depression early on, substance use, suicidality now, things like that. Where have you seen the trends throughout your last 2 decades of teaching kind of go through?
Yeah. So when I first started teaching, I would say anxiety was not really anything I dealt with. Kids never, it wasn't a word that anybody talked about. Were there kids who were more anxious? Yes. I mean, that's always been a reality. Again, of being a teenager, I think that transcends time. However, it was very minor. It was a very small group of kids. Whereas now, and especially during COVID and like just past that, it was felt like it was the majority of kids were in some way dealing with some emotional, mental health issue. Anxiety is huge. Like you said, talking in front of people or having to do anything that is new or different or challenging. Kids really shy away from that. They don't want to do it. They'll get away from it as much as possible. So anxiety has increased. I never would have imagined at the beginning of my career how much I would have to talk to kids about suicide and about that. Like I have sat with kids who are considering it. I've had kids who've had a full plan who like wrote a note to say goodbye, and like I never thought that that would have been a reality of being a teacher. So when I first started, I felt like I was just a teacher. Now I feel like maybe I'm a teacher and I'm trying to be like a little bit of a psychologist and deal with things that are way out of my skill set. So it's just the prevalence has definitely increased.
Wow,
Mhm.
that is so sad that we have to experience this in today's society. Especially with the most vulnerable populations. Not just teenagers, but just children in and of
Mhm.
itself, right? Like that's a man. That's so sad.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
part of it, like when you're a teenager, everything that happens feels like it's all encompassing. You can't see beyond this moment. So if you're really, really struggling as a kid, you can't see that in 10 years, it's not going to matter. It's going to be so far away. They just can't see beyond the moment. So I think that puts them in an extra vulnerable situation because when things are really bad, if they don't have the skills to deal with that or talk about it or have a support system or whichever, they they might resort to last, you know, those last resorts rather than, thinking, oh, it'll be better. It's going to get better. They can't see that.
yeah, no, and I think that's part of that catastrophizing, right?
Hmm.
Something happens, and boom, my whole life is a complete mess. Everything's a complete mess. My whole life is a disaster. I'm never good enough. Nothing is ever going to work out. Things like that. And you're right. It's a difficulty seeing past the current circumstance and past the current
Yeah.
moment. Uh, what do you think helps people, especially the teenage population, to kind of sit down, relax, and say, hey, there's more to life than this one circumstance, than this one relationship, than this one social media post that, your classmate over here said something. Like, what do you feel like helps teenagers the most when they're in that critical moment of catastrophizing and they're really at a jumping off point?
I think connection is huge. So having somebody that they can talk to, and if that's not a parent, hopefully that somebody else is a trusted adult because from what I have seen is that kids who are really, really struggling don't have that communication, that relationship at home. And when they go home, instead of, talking to somebody about it, instead they try and just like disassociate through like social media, for example, and that doom scrolling, right? Which just is perpetuating it. And the problem with that too is the algorithm. If they, you know, get themselves into an algorithm that's promoting self-harm or promoting, further depression, which there's been studies that shown that kids, if you make an Instagram account, for example, from a 14-year-old girl's as a 14-year-old girl and just let the algorithm do its thing, it will automatically start feeding you self-harm and depression content, suicide content, those types of things. So I think kids get trapped in that, but the kids who have those connections have something, another outlet like sports, something away from, isolating in their bedroom, then they're going to have, somebody help them out. So for me, I've been that adult for a couple of kids. I know during COVID, I sat on a Google Meet, like just a little like Zoom call with a kid. I ended up having to call the police, and he had to go to the hospital because he was, I couldn't just like trust that he was going to be okay. But he reached out to me, and just having somebody to connect with is so important.
Wow. That is super, super sad. So let me ask you then, because you didn't say much on substance use, and I know
Mhm.
here in the U.S. we have a major problem with, especially with our teenage population. So my question is what does it look like with your teenage population in Canada?
So I live in a very rural community.
Mm,
So like drinking, I think, would be the main form of substance abuse. It's definitely more normalized than I would like think is appropriate for teenagers. But it's very normalized in my community, the drinking piece, and I think a lot of kids do use it as a tool to numb if they're struggling, right? They're not just having a couple of drinks; they're drinking excessively to the point of blacking out, throwing up, they're sick, and they talk about it at school the next day, like it's very normal. I know in our like the city, so I'm about an hour from a city, but there is a lot of substance abuse. I think that's a very like I think it's everywhere right now where we see kids. I know a couple of kids that I taught are actually living on the streets in the city, and addicted to who knows what, right? So it's definitely increasing because, like you said, that mental health piece is increasing, but we don't have the resources readily available for people, regardless if you're a kid or an adult. So people go to whatever is going to numb that and take it away.
and before I ask you, what resources you do need, I wanted to read off some stats to you because, and I don't know which country this is. I just did a quick search as far as like trends and stats as far as mental health and substance use. Teenagers 12 to 17, any illicit drug was 3.9 million. Uh, for marijuana, it was found to be 2.7 million. For alcohol, 2.7 million. Prescription pain reliever misuse or prescription pain drugs, 0.4 million. Hallucinogens such as psilocybin, zero point 0.4 million. Cocaine, zero point 0.07 million. And that was 21 to 24. Let me see. For ages 12 to 17, binge drinking alcohol was found to be about zero point 0.9 million. Nicotine vaping was about 1.6 million. Any tobacco products, or excuse me, cigarettes was 0.3 million. Now, when we look at mental health, major depressive episode, estimated current estimation as far as of last year was about 3.8 million. Major depressive episode with severe impairment was 2.8 million. Serious suicidal thoughts was 2.6 million. Made a suicide plan was 1.2 million. And those who attempted, 0.7 million. And it just keeps going.
Yeah.
And it's sad. It's sad.
Mhm.
And we look at those stats and we think about our people who are the next generation who we're teaching to come up.
Yeah, it's definitely eye-opening. It's alarming, right?
It is. It is. No, 100%. You're absolutely right. It's eye opening. It's alarming. And it makes you think, I think that really leads into the next question because you left off at a point that I'm like, that needs to be talked about, right? It really does. What resources do y'all need that is so critical to our young population?
Right. And I think just like with adults, it's such a complex answer, right? Like I think prevention, communication, that needs to be key because you can't reacting to these things. It's already too late. We have to start before. So like conversations early on, and as teachers we can do that, but it has to be happening at home too. Giving kids some kind of outlet. They have to have something that they're passionate about and something that they can use as an outlet. Like you see athletes, right? The kids who are involved in their sports or arts or whatever, they tend to be okay because they have something to fall into when they're struggling. Um, I think a lot of people, and I show this in my books, are once their kids become teenagers, they feel like they're almost done. Like, oh, they're okay now. They're old enough. They don't need me anymore. And I don't think that that is true. And then I try and show that in both of my books that actually I think they need their parents maybe even more than when they were little. Like you can't just let them go hide away in their room. Like the one boy I was chatting with on the Zoom call, I said, when's the last time you talked to somebody in person? And he said 3 days. When's the last time you went outside? A week. When's the last time you moved your body? A few days. Like all of those like basic necessities of like this is what you do when you're feeling crappy, even if you don't want to. He wasn't doing those things and he had nobody checking in on him. So we need, like kids need somebody. They have to have a trusted adult. They need to have connections. They have to have somebody talking to them about these issues, and they need an outlet. And I think just in general, we need preventative education about mental health stuff because they're going to find that information now on their phone, maybe through their algorithm, which isn't going to be the best information. So we just got to talk to them. And that's honestly why I wrote my books was I just needed a tool to like I wanted to raise awareness about what I'm seeing in the classroom because I felt so helpless. I can only do so much when I see those kids and then they go home or they go on a break or vacation or whatever and I can't do anything. So this was my way of communicating all of that helplessness and raise awareness about what I'm seeing.
Wow. Wow. I'm just I'm baffled at where where we're at as a society. Um and if you hear that, that's the cat in the background. Yeah.
Well,
That is just so sad. That is so let me ask you this, okay? Because I know here in North Carolina we are pushing a lot of partnerships right into community. Do you feel like partnerships is what the educational districts or the school districts in Canada need as far as like partnerships with community agencies, things like that?
I mean, yeah, I don't think it hurts, right? Like bringing outside sources in that are meant to talk about these things because I don't know where you are at, but we're getting so many funding cuts at school. Like even our counselor is only there, I think, 0.3 of the day that she actually has time to be a counselor. So that's not nearly enough to help out a whole group of like a whole hundreds of kids, right? It's just not possible. So outside help is definitely important. Connections with mental health groups, others like psychologists, something, anything will help. Like that can definitely be helpful because I think as teachers, we're just not trained to do these things. And absolutely, I'll be that person for a kid if they need me, but I don't know what to say or what to do, and I do my best, but we need people who can actually help kids. And it just doesn't seem like there's enough enough of that to go around, right?
Well, do let me ask you a hypothetical then.
Mhm.
And by no means would I ever say practice outside of one's scope. So this is again an educational question because I feel like it's, we're at a breaking point, right? Where, here in the States, we have social work staff, therapists, stuff like that, who responds to crises with our law enforcement. As long as it's like they know that it's a mental health and crisis or anything like that. If they get on scene and they see that it's a mental health crisis, of course they bring in the right folks to deal with it. And then we also have agencies where they might not have a mental health tech go out with them, but the one thing that they do have is they have enough mental health training to be able to make the decision that do you go to jail or do you go to a local hospital, which one you want. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Kind of leave that up to the person, depending on the circumstances. I mean, if they don't rob the bank, they're not going to go to a hospital unless the magistrate sends them. Like, and I'm just
Mhm.
using this as extremes here. So bear with me on some of my analogies and examples here. But my my question is, what do you feel like with the budget cuts, things like that? What do you feel like teachers need to be better equipped to handle mental health substance use crises?
Well, training, some kind of training, right? Because like when you go, through your education degree, this was not mentioned at all. There was no discussion on what to do if a kid, does this or says this or needs help with this. It's just how do you teach the material? That's it. How do you deal with behaviors, right? If kids are being bad, but like if that was incorporated into the education piece, I think that would be huge because it's just a reality now that you're not just dealing with, teaching curriculum. That's just a small part of the job. There's so much more to it, especially now with, mental health problems that are flooding into the classroom. So if that was actually part of training, I think maybe teachers would feel a bit more confident, going into those situations. And yeah, like outside supports too. So if I do have a kid that I don't know what to do, I have somebody to go, and how do I proceed with this? What's my best move? Because no teacher wants to feel responsible if something goes wrong, right? If God forbid, a child does do something and I was the last person they talked to, I don't know how I proceed then. Like I need support if I'm going to deal with those things.
No, you're right. I mean, it goes back to training. I mean, there's I mean, that's really it. It goes back to training. It goes back to
Mhm.
knowledge and understanding and education. And I don't mean just our class. I don't mean
Mhm.
just like, oh, go sit in this class for an hour and you get you some
No.
CEUs. No, like we need to be able to, like for an example, when I went to Seattle, and that's when I was talking about my Seattle, about my Canadian border experience, freaking awesome experience. But a lot of our training was around native. It was themed around native people, right? Indigenous populations and stuff like that. Beautiful experience, and I got the opportunity to experience the clinical skill sets there that I was able to take back to my, to the people that I serve. And if you'd have told me to, I truly believe if you'd have told me to read this in a book, or here read this and then go apply it, I don't think it'd be as effective because I got to experience the actual skill itself
Mhm.
and then go apply it, right? And the same thing with dealing with self harm and anything related to self harming behaviors. It wasn't until I worked where I currently work at. I went through their rigorous training that I actually was able to take knowledge in the book and actually apply it and expand on it. And now I understand much more than what this book is actually saying because you can only say but so much in a book. You can only say but so much on this computer screen with this presenter. You need to be able to experience it, whether directly, vicariously, or what have you, before I think anyways, before we can truly genuinely understand and apply it. And everybody's different, of course, but that's just my thoughts and my personal experiences
Yeah,
in
no,
life.
I agree because even being a teacher, like they sit there and tell you how to teach in a classroom, but you don't get it until you actually go and stand in front of a group of kids and like, oh, okay, what do I do? Like you don't know, right? You have to have those experiences for sure.
Yeah, no, 100%. Um, and I do want to touch base on something real quick. You were mentioning a about a situation you had, an unfortunate situation that you had to stay on the phone till police got there, things like that. And I'm sorry that you had to experience that, and I feel like if y'all had um, appropriate resources, it'd have been the actual school counselor or psychologist. But what I'm grateful for is that you learned through your experiences as a school teacher on how to build trust with people. And so I definitely, my hat goes off to you. A lot of people cannot build trust with their young folks.
Hmm.
Um, Unfortunately, I mean, that's just reality.
Yeah,
So thank you for the work that you do with our young folks. Thank you for being that leader, that inspiration, that teacher, being in the weeds with them. What
well,
do
if
you
that makes
feel
it easier, right? Sorry, I
like?
interrupted you.
No, go ahead. Go
Just
ahead.
like those relationships, that's what it's all about. So the fact I think that I build those relationships with kids just makes I can be that person then for kids who don't have that at home. And that's what ended up happening is his parents were not supportive of mental health issues, wouldn't be there for him. So I was just grateful that he had somebody and I was able to, he's grown up now and I actually he came and visited me at school last year and he's doing wonderfully. So I'm just yeah, those relationships are key. They're critical.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
I mean, trust is the one of the driving foundations of everyday life. I
Hmm.
mean, it's when we walk into our house, we flip the light switch. We expect and trust the fact that our lights are going to turn on, right? When we hit the switch. Same thing with employment. We trust that our employer is going to pay us every week, every 2 weeks, once a month, however people get paid. Therefore, we show up to work, right?
Yep.
Like we do these things based on trust, right? I don't walk in and into an interview and say, okay, you give me a $5,000 check now, I'm going to work for the next 2 months. Like that's not, if you're dealing with contracts, it's probably one thing, but when you're dealing with actual employment, they don't roll that way. So I have to show up for a week or two or even a month before they write a check to me. So yeah, trust is a huge thing in everything relationally when it comes to humanity. Do you
Yeah,
find
for
that
sure.
that is hard for you, hard for teachers to build nowadays?
I guess it depends on the teacher and it depends on the kids because I'm not going to be the person for every kid, right? We're just, you don't vibe with everybody. You don't form that trust with everybody. And there are some teachers who show up to work and they're just there to teach and they're not putting in that effort to make those connections. Um, but I do feel like it makes everything easier. So it makes my job easier because if I have those connections with kids, they work better, they listen better, they're respectful. It it makes the whole world better. But I think kids who struggle, again, like which I showed in the book, if they don't have that person to trust, like you said, and that might not be their parents, it might not be a teacher, whoever it is, they have to find somebody. They need to have a touch point somewhere because otherwise they might make choices that are going to be, lifelong choices that they can't take back. So yeah, trust for me is huge and building those relationships with kids is so significant. But I'm not going to be that kid for everybody. That person, sorry, for everybody.
No, and you're right. I mean, we vibe with who we vibe with. Like
Yeah.
we can't help who we vibe with versus who we don't vibe with. So let me ask you this then, because I did not expect to go on a trust deal there. That's one of my favorite, topics. I could talk about trust all day. Uh getting back to that student, right? Using that student as an example, what do you feel like from your perspective is missing and or needed in the homes?
I guess, yeah, just there's a few things because teenagers are tricky. Like they want you to be there, but not too much. They want you to check in, but not too much because they're just gonna get annoyed with you and snappy at you. Um, I think, like I said before too, parents think that they're done. Oh, they don't need me. They're fine. They can just sit in their room and do whatever. And I don't think that's true. I think they still want you and they still need you. You got to check in. What talk to them. What's happening on your phone? Like what did you see? Well, who are you talking to? Like you have to build those conversations. And I almost feel like you have to have that dialogue open before they're teenagers because yeah, they get really squirrely soon as they hit that teenager realm. Um, and I think a huge part too is you can't judge them. I think that's why kids can like trust me so much is because the stuff that they'll tell me sometimes it's just like, oh my gosh, like what? But I don't ever judge them outwardly because as soon as you judge them, they're gone. They're never going to talk to you again because they don't want to feel judged. They're they're too skittish and that judgment hurts. Like I said, they're so worried about what people think of them. So open dialogue constantly. And if they tell you things that are shocking, keeping your judgment hidden, judge them in private later, but don't outwardly judge them or they'll never trust you enough to tell you anything again. And I think that's really hard as a parent. And I am a parent, but my son's 10, like that's my oldest. So I say all of these wonderful things, but I don't know what it's going to be like with my own kid. Like when it's other kids that talk to me, I'm separated a little bit. And I just want to be there for them and listen to them and I'll have conversations like maybe you shouldn't do that. Like was that the best idea? But it's not in a judgy way. So they'll continue to tell me things. And I hope that like the dialogue I've started with my own kids, we talk about the hard stuff. I will talk about it all. And if they come to me, I'm going to listen and I will be there, even if it makes me upset what they're telling me. And I think that's what a lot of parents aren't willing to do is keep that dialogue open and just let them tell you the hard stuff. Hold back the judgments. That's huge.
I love it. I love it. So I do have to ask him, okay, because we are talking about a very vulnerable population here. Do you find that the females are much harder to talk about or easier to connect with, either or, when compared to males? Like, what does that has your experience and perception shown?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the kid. I do feel like it is easier for me to connect with girls just because I can relate to them a little bit better. But like I said, that one boy, he was a boy and we connected really well. And he trusted me. We could have good conversations. And I have a few boys even right now in my class that we just like can joke and get along. And I feel like they would come to me if they needed it. But just in general, I think girls are easier. And I think the problems that I see in mental health are very different between genders. So girls tend to lean more towards like that self-harm piece. It's almost like romanticized in the media a little bit, like the cutting. I don't remember when it started, but it almost felt like it was cool that girls would cut and they would almost brag about it. They would show off their scars. But definitely they go into that like inward, like internal, and I don't know, I can just relate to their problems of like self-esteem and insecurity a little bit more, where boys tend to get more like angry. Um, that tends to be where they go, and not all, but they don't want to talk at all. Like they just want to be mad, and where that aggression comes out in completely different ways. So it's very dependent on kids, but yeah, in general, I do find it easier to talk to girls. And both of my books, I write from the perspective of a teenage girl. I am writing a third though, where I'm playing around with a teenage boy perspective. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes.
Well, let's take it one step further then, okay? Because we're talking about males and females right now. Let's take it to the LGBTQ population versus non-LGBTQ.
Mhm.
Do you, have you seen, because I know what research says, but I want to hear it from your direct experience because it could be community related, could be country related. I mean, anything related to kind of show differences in current research. Uh, have you seen where the LGBTQ population in in your community is affected more negatively when it comes to anxiety, self harm, substance use, things like that, when compared to those not within that population?
Yeah, I think that's probably in general, right? Sweeping, the rates are just tend to be higher. And I live in a very rural, like farming community where it is not okay to be openly LGBTQ plus. Um, so I have had a few kids who have told me on the down low that they are LGBTQ plus, and yeah, they are obviously struggling because they can't be themselves openly. I have a student right now who he gets called gay constantly just because he doesn't fit in, with the masculine stereotypes. Um, and it bothers him. I think out externally he deals with it well, but I'm sure internally, he has different feelings about that. But yeah, it's a very, very hard community to be openly yourself where I live. So I have definitely seen that as kids come to me and say, tell me that they are, but don't tell anybody. Please don't tell anybody. They're looking for books or something that they can identify with, and they need to do that secretly because they don't want anybody to know or to see what they're reading. Um, so I haven't seen many again because nobody is open, but I know in our city center, the rates of self-harm and anxiety and depression are through the roof for LGBTQ plus youth.
And now I have to ask, okay, because we talked about the resources needed for it in a general manner. Do you feel like there's a huge barrier between the resources you currently have versus, for the general population when compared to the LGBTQ population? Do you feel like that gap is much more kind of significant a little bit?
Yeah, so hugely significant, mostly because we actually our provincial government put in legislation just this year that if kids out themselves to a teacher, we legally have to out them to their parents. Um, it is a law. And if a student asks to be called by a different name, we also have to let the parents know. And all girls in our school sports have to confirm that they were females at birth before they can play school sports. So right now, just we have no resources for LGBTQ plus youth because legislation is not allowing us to actually do that. So I foresee that gap increasing even further because as before, I might have been able to be a trusted adult for somebody to come to if they were struggling with their identity. Now, if they don't want their parents to know, I can't be that person for them because legally I have to tell their parents all of that information that they tell me. So we are going to see that, I'm sure, in the next few years, just even become larger, which is terrible.
And see, that surprises me
Mhm.
because I, from looking at the from observing news media, you will think that Canada was much more the opposite to
Yeah.
that.
I think we are in general, but the province I live in is very, very, it's not.
Now it
Yeah,
makes so
this
got you.
is
So
provincial
it's kind of
legislation, just our province. So the rest of the provinces, this is not the case. So
gotcha.
specifically where I live, it is very specific legislation that is just actually put in place this school year.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow. That is, oh man, that's so sad that,
Yeah.
you know, because you might be dealing or working with a kid. I don't want to use the word dealing, but it kind of fits.
Hmm.
You might be working or dealing with a kid that uh, is already being sexually, physically abused, emotionally abused, even neglected in the home. And now, what if the family is super, super traditional and disagree with the LGBTQ population and those ideals, and then that kid then has to go home after you done breached their, breached that trust, and what conflicts are going to arise in the home. You see where
Absolutely.
I'm going with that at?
Yeah.
And it's sad. It is
Yeah. And
truly,
that's the
truly sad.
concern. Yeah. Like I don't know, if the kid came out to me, that's not my place to go communicate to their parents. They will communicate to their parents when and if they feel comfortable. And that's the stance I've always taken. But now I could lose my job, which is crazy.
Mhm.
But you're right. You don't know what the reaction is at home. This kid is already struggling. Their mental health now is struggling. They just needed somebody to talk to because they know they're going to be harmed at home for being who they are. So that's definitely the concern. Yeah, it's terrible.
Wow, that is so, so sad. So let me ask you this then. Um, what do you Well, I want to switch it from children to adults now.
Mhm.
Do you find it easier or more manageable? Shall I say more manageable? I think that kind of phrase fits for the female teachers in comparison to the male teachers to work within the mental health substance use crises area. Do you feel like there's a barrier there where kind of one, this group over here feels more comfortable versus this group right here?
I guess you could generalize overall. Again, this is dependent on individuals, but I think there's more women teachers, first of all. Like our school, there's way more women than there are male. And women just tend to be more nurturing, tend to, be more in tune with emotions. Not, again, this is all very generalized. Um, I know in my experience, like I I have worked with men who are very, very in tune and connected with kids and good like with their own mental health and willing to talk about things and be open. And women who haven't, right? Like I think it's very dependent, but in general, I do feel like women tend to deal with that better from what I have seen.
Look, I had to ask, okay,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of guys, especially coming along when I came along. It was Dr. Claudia Black. She said it best when she was talking about the family systems and substance use. Don't talk, don't tell, don't trust. Don't say, don't feel, like all of these don'ts, right? And guys, we hear it more often than not. Uh,
Yeah.
well, you're not supposed to cry. Real men don't cry. Things like that. So that's why I was asking. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
I will say one other effect of like social media that we've seen kind of trickle into the classroom too is this radicalization of young boys. And it is very much that be a man, like don't show your emotions.
mm,
And, instead of being sad, be angry. Um, like the Andrew Tate, right? That is like I have a huge group of kids who follow that online. And that's scary because like you said, if you're told as a male to constantly just like shove it away, don't talk about it, don't feel, don't cry, that's why we see an increase in men's mental health, right? Like we know the statistics show too that men struggle with mental health more in the later years than women. Men are more likely to harm themselves than women. And so that terrifies me because that's a really hard one to stop. If this is the information that they're constantly consuming and the beliefs that are helping them form, their identities with, that's
Yeah.
really scary to me as that increases.
Yeah. No, it
Mhm.
really is scary. It really is. I mean, to think about, and I want anybody, including teenagers, because we open our stuff up. Anybody can subscribe. Anybody can follow. Anything of that sort. If you're struggling, teenager or not, uh, it is normal to have an emotion.
Mhm.
It's what we're born with. So, listen, we've been up here for a hot minute. We've been talking about teenage mental health, the struggles, the barriers, and I want you to take us out on a couple of questions. First is, if anybody wanted to ask you to come on and speak, maybe again, maybe I also want you to reshare your where they can buy your books from. They want you to maybe do some type of speaking engagement, maybe a TEDx, whatever it is. How do they contact you? Where do they get your books from?
Yeah, so I'm primarily on Instagram. That's kind of where I keep people posted on what I'm doing and what I'm reading about, researching, and all that stuff. So it's at Tara Hodgson Author. I have a website too where I keep posted with what's going on, and that's at www.tarahodgson.ca. And yeah, that's primarily where I can be found.
I love it. And if there's anybody who's watching or listening, what do you want them to take away from this?
I guess like the whole reason why I wrote my books was because I wanted to bring awareness to what kids are going through, and I wanted a tool for people to, know, to spark some really meaningful, difficult, but meaningful conversations between kids and adults. So my books very much cater to the young adult crowd, but also to the adult crowd. And honestly, like I've said to a few people, like you read it as an adult first and then have your kid read it. And even though it might be uncomfortable, come together and now let's talk about it. Like, what did you see in yourself when you read about this character? Have you seen some of these things or experienced some of these things? Or no, you can come to me if this situation ever happens to you. So my books are not they're not easy reads because I do touch on these darker themes, but they're so necessary. And I don't feel like there's much out there like this that's really touching on the real, the gritty, the ugly, the hard things that kids are experiencing. So I just want people to read it and talk about it. That is my main goal.
Uh, And last but not least, and the most important question is, what is your call to action?
I guess my call to action is to bring as much awareness as possible to how kids are struggling and how they need the adults in their world to know what's going on so they can help them navigate this added complexity of this digital world. So I want people to be aware and help each other out so people don't hurt themselves or don't find themselves in dangerous situations.
I love it. Folks, y'all have heard it. The teenage mental health, substance use crisis, suicidality crisis, self harm crisis. You've heard it. Again, there's resources out there. Some areas of unfortunately and fortunately have more resources than other areas. And I say unfortunately because you just heard her talking about her experience in a rural community. Hope I pronounced that word right. I
Yeah,
always mess that word up.
you got it.
So there's resources out there. Get connected. If you are struggling, if you're a teenager and you're watching this, reach out. Okay, my email is one moment pllc at gmail.com. Now, I cannot provide therapy to you, but I can find you some resources, and I'll do it free of charge. You don't even have to worry about it. I'll get you connected to some way, shape, form, or fashion. Again, Miss Tara, been an absolute privilege and honor. Thank you for coming on. It's been a wild ride.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm going to end the live. So don't hang up yet.